Happy Juneteenth, everybody. I'm sitting here getting boned up on my Juneteenth and what's been going on and what Juneteenth is all about. And I just posted a video. I think it says the origin of Black culture. And I highly, highly, highly recommend that everyone watch this video because it tells the story of the British pale-faced people who came over here in the early days of colonialism and how rude and lazy and thuggish and brutal that they were, and how that affected the blacks in the South who were working in the fields and stuff, and how they adopted that kind of thug life type of, culture from people who weren't even black. So that's funny, huh? And I just want to say one thing that's missing from that video is the Indian. They don't say anything about the Indian and about Indian culture, which is 1/3 of the black story, because most black Americans are triracial, right? We have pale face, we have native Indian, which is native Indian has all the shades, okay? It goes from the darkest all the way up to the most high yellow person, right? And all different kinds of hair too. The native people of this land, just like any other land, were mostly looked like me, had darker skin and had some wavy hair and stuff. So he left that part out. And then of course we have the very dark skin ancestry as well, which people want to still believe came from Africa. And I swear to you that there's no evidence of that whatsoever. So anyway, I'm not here to talk about Africa, because that's just that's not what I'm here to talk about. What I wanted to say is that Black America is a combination of factors that dealt with something called slavery, that they called slavery, and slavery is not really the correct terminology for what we went through. For example, let me just share this with you. I was doing genealogy. I've been doing genealogy of my family, and what I found was that if you were a man and you had a wife and children, then your wife and children were your property. They were your slaves. You were called the owner, okay? And your property or your slaves were your wife and children. And I saw this over and over and over again in genealogy. So I just want to say that, to say that everybody was a slave and that people were owners was kind of like, well, that's actually a family that you're looking at, So there's that. And the more I dig into it and the more I look at the whole story of slavery, I realize that what happened here wasn't any different than what happens anywhere. That entrepreneurial type of people go all over the earth. It doesn't matter what continent it is or what landmass, you're always going to find natives there. And, if you're, depending on who you are, if you're a pirate or, depending on what the circumstances are, you might enslave those people, especially if you're Catholic and you're, serving the Pope and stuff, because the Pope actually gave orders to control all of the native people of the whole earth. That was actually a real bull. That was a papal bull that was decreed back 500 years ago or whatever. So the same thing that happened in Haiti happened here. The same thing that happened in Africa happened here. The same thing that happened in Indonesia and the Philippines, everywhere, okay? In Australia, everything. It's exactly the same, okay? What basically happened was that the Pope's Jesuits rolled up on a country, a landmass that already had a culture there. It had a native culture there. It had people. And they said, if you guys don't convert to Catholicism and pledge your fealty to the Pope, then you're going to be imprisoned. And most of the people were like, screw that. I'm not doing that. We got our own thing. What are you talking about? And then they started brutalizing people that way. And the only reason that it worked was because people in the native community sold each other out. And so that's a shame, but it didn't happen immediately like that. But, these people were already feuding anyway, the native populations. And so when the Pope and them pulled up, it was just kind of like, they got acquainted with who's fighting with who, and they got people to kidnap other natives from other tribes. And this is how, the so-called institution of slavery happened. there wasn't too much migration from landmass to landmass. Okay, that wasn't necessary because there were plenty of natives on the land already, wherever you're talking about. So what happened here in the United States is nothing like Spielberg wants to show, or people, roots, or none of that. Like it didn't have nothing to do with bringing people over here on ships. Not that people didn't come on ships, but they came from Europe and they were escaping the Inquisition. Once again, as I've said before, learn about the Inquisition. Those people, those Jews that were being persecuted by the Pope, they were black, okay? And those are the ancestors of the Black Americans. It's those European Jews who were running away from the Pope. They ran. A lot of them came to the Americas. A lot of them went to Holland as well. A lot of them went to France. They went wherever they could go. Okay, so I just want to, I just want to throw my 2 cents in. If you want to do the research, Curry Mayo is the only one who talks about this. Kurimeo. He's the only one who really digs in, and he's reading sources that are legit. Okay, it's not his opinion here. We're not talking about opinions. We're talking about actual sources of people who have researched this subject. And some of the books that he reads are from 500 years ago of people who were actually there on foot, in person, okay, dealing with the whole so-called, the colonization of the Americas. The people who came over here as colonizers were black, and they were Jew, and they had to bring a whole bunch of people with them just to save their lives, because they were running away from the Pope, from the Inquisition. Okay, now the Inquisition, when you learn about it, they're never going to say that these people were black, because they want you to think that they're the Ashkenaz. They were not the Ashkenaz. The Ashkenaz have never been persecuted a day in their life, not by anybody. Sorry to go off on that tangent. I basically my point with this video is that slavery wasn't that big of a deal, as they wanted us to think it was. It was more of a family affair than anything else. Like I said, these Jews came over here, and when they got here, they encountered Hebrew-speaking Indians, because the Indians also spoke Hebrew, and they intermarried with each other, and they worked the land together. And the European Jews, they were wealthy and prestigious in Europe. So they created a government system here, and they created an agricultural system and a trade system. And they were the enterprising people, and they had their servants, and so it was more of that. And the pale-faced people came later, like significantly later. The first colonizers were here in the 1400s, and the pale-faced people didn't show up until the 1600s. Okay, so by then it was already the institutions and everything were already established. So to me, that's good news. This message that I'm sending to you is a happy message that says that, you know what, Black Americans, we didn't really go through what Hollywood and what our textbooks at school wanted us to think that we went through. We didn't wear shackles on our legs, and we weren't like whipped. You know what I mean? Not that some people weren't whipped, okay, but that was the extreme exception. That kind of stuff didn't really go on. That kind of stuff is stuff that happens in a war. And there were Indian wars going on, and then the history of humanity is a history of war. But as far as it being exceptional as an institution of slavery, and as far as there being like millions of African people brought here with shackles and being forced to like break up with their families and not speak their languages, and no, there's not a trace of that anywhere. Okay, there are no artifacts to indicate whatsoever. You never saw an African garment. You never saw an African carving here in the States. You never saw an African proverb. You never hear any stories. And even in the Africans themselves, that they don't even have stories about it happening, about about the pale-faced people pulling up on their land and taking their people over all the way to over here. So once again, sorry for that tangent. The truth is coming out, and thank God for that. Watch that video, y'all. It's called The Origin of Black Culture. Very interesting. And just a disclaimer, there is a lot of racial, it's heavily racial, and it's difficult to watch, but very, very important. Okay, it's a missing piece of the story. Thanks for watching.